Hi listeners, this is Dungeon Master Kyle. Shay and I are here today a little bit early before the music to give you guys an announcement. Season 1 of Dungeon Master Talk is going to be coming to an end with episode 22 dropping on May 5th. But fear not, Shay, do you want to let our listeners know when we'll be back?
I do. So we are going to take a 1 episode drop break. So we will take basically the month of May off, and then we will be right back with season 2 as of June 2nd of this year. We are so excited to bring this new project to you. I think it's going to kind of take what we've been talking about in the last season and then kind of mix it all together and bring it into more of a cohesive tool for you Dungeon Masters, both seasoned veterans as well as the brand new DMs alike. I think it'll give you some tools to really put together what we've been talking about for almost the last year and see where we go from there. So we're super, super excited for this, and I hope you guys will bear with us through this little break.
Yeah, so again, everyone, the dates here, May 5th, final episode of Season 1, but we will be back at the start of June with Season 2, and we'll see you guys then.
Bye, guys. Hello and welcome to Dungeon Master Talk, a podcast by Dungeon Masters for Dungeon Masters. I am Dungeon Master Shay.
And I'm Dungeon Master Kyle. How are you doing today, Shay?
Kyle, I am doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, sir. Any night that I am talking to you about Dungeons and Dragons is a good night.
I will take that to the bank. That is absolutely true.
100%.
Well, listeners, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate you so much for joining our discussion about all things Dungeon Master related in the game of Dungeons and Dragons. If you would do us a quick favor and like or subscribe on your favorite platform of choice, that would really help us out in the algorithms and help to grow the DMT community. But more importantly, guys, we just super appreciate you guys being here with us and talking all things Dungeon Master related. This topic is going to be a little bit different. It's not necessarily mechanic. It's more philosophy and theory.
Yep.
From a Dungeon Master's perspective, guys. We are talking about the idea of a linear story versus more of a sandbox story versus railroading. And the big question, is there such thing as a good railroading DM? We will talk about that later. I will give a quick update on my game. We are actually playing the day after this session records. So on the next episode, I will have an update for you on that. And I know, Kyle, you and I, we've been talking with our group, the one that you run for us.
Yep.
We should have a game, hopefully,
2 weeks
here by the end of April, I think. It's about mid-April.
Yeah, we are 2 weeks away from our next play weekend, and it could not be soon enough. We have missed a couple now.
Oh, my goodness.
Because of life being rough, and so I am getting ready to put out the recording of the last one to everyone and getting ready to go. I'm like 3 times over excited for this session. I've been prepped for it a couple times, but life kept getting in the way.
Yeah. But hey, listeners, so let's get into this, Kyle. So
yes,
like we said to start, you have basically 3 different kind of schools of thought. You kind of have a very linear story base. You have a very sandbox based type storytelling, and then you also have that railroading type. So let's kind of define those for a little bit. So linear is, to me at least, linear storytelling is kind of like a pre-generated campaign, right? A pre-gen. Because it's basically a laid out story for you, and you kind of have to continue to lay out the story as the players are going, so that way they can continue to play and figure out what's going on.
Yep, and really, like listeners, we've always tied a lot of this stuff back to pop culture. We both love examples in life. It's how we talk when we talk to each other, so it's how we talk to you guys. This would be like, think about your like Batman Arkham Asylum or Uncharted video game where the world is there and it's robust and a lot happens and it's a great story and it's fun to play in, but it is confined. You basically, it's not that your players don't have choice. They do have choice, but it's limited choice. Mm-hmm. You're not going to deviate too far out of the realm of what this story is. It's contained. That's that type of story. There is, I would argue, kind of a variant of that called the semi-linear, and that's where there is a mainline plot to follow. You will entertain subplots and side quests that can take you a ways away, but ultimately the way forward through life is that set campaign. Like that, basically, that set story. These are the beats you are going to hit.
I know for myself, at least lately, my group has been on our Princes of the Apocalypse campaign, so my story has been very linear. I've tried to treat it I've tried to give it more of a sandbox feel or an open campaign, because that's the way I generally like to play games. And we'll kind of touch back on linear in just a second. So sandbox games, you think of like Grand Theft Auto is probably a big one. You think like Skyrim. Minecraft in theory is a sandbox game.
Minecraft's like the definition.
Yeah, exactly. You go wherever you want, whenever you want. You can do whatever you want until something tries to eat you. But it's very open. You can do the main quest. You can go off on your own little tangents. You can go hunting for session after session. It's very, very open, and hence the word sandbox.
Yeah, and really the concept of a main quest in the sandbox is kind of up to the players at that point in time. Like, you might have introduced conflict, but really when you're thinking of sandbox, the prep time for DM, it's less into who necessarily the villain is and what they're up to. It's more about who are all the forces in the world that they could interact with in different ways. Because Sandbox really does allow for your characters to become the villains, to become the heroes, or to be a neutral party that just exists in the world while other forces are at work. And the Sandbox style, all of these are equally hard to prepare for. I think Sandbox has the concept, though, that kind of fear, especially for a lot of new DMs, of like, can I really create one? Can I continue to populate it if there's not this consistent story that I can come back to kind of fill it? Especially like, we just talked a couple sessions about improv. That I think there's a strong debate to be had of which one's actually easier to improv in, Sandbox or linear storytelling. Because linear, you've got a lot more control over the elements that can come into play. Therefore, it's honestly kind of easier to improv because there's limited. But then whereas Sandbox, well, you've created this entire world. So then in theory, shouldn't it be easier to improv because a giant dinosaur rounding the corner doesn't seem as random now? But also then again, you have the whole world at play, and you're a lot more at the whim of your characters, your players' kind of wants in those moments.
Yeah, and the thing with Sandbox, at least for me, it's one of those things where if you take the idea of like the Skyrim map or like a Grand Theft Auto map, like when you first start the game, your map is very small. Like, there's clearly a bigger map there, but you just haven't seen it yet. So like as you start to work your way around like the cities in the starting town, or you get out into the countryside, or as you go on the quest, your map starts, expanding, getting bigger and bigger, to where finally you will have the whole map. The only thing I would say, and this is probably more for veteran moves than it is for early DMs, if you choose to do the sandbox route, that's great. There's nothing saying that you shouldn't or couldn't do that. I would maybe urge you to have more of that world fleshed out before you start session 0.
Yep.
And the reason for that is because if you're going to play that openness, you really need to have at least a general idea of landscapes. You need to have a general idea of multiple governments that you might have between bigger cities. Like maybe you have the capital city of the country. Maybe you have multiple landlocked countries in the same planet. Or not planet, in the same world. So you're into your normal planning as it is. But I would try to have, if I'm going to do more sandbox games, have at least a general idea for most of the map.
Yep.
Maybe not the very like fringe edges, but at least probably give or take about a good couple 100 miles.
Oh yeah.
From your starting point, just to kind of give you a runway, if you will, and buffer if your players decide to go there.
Yeah, and a lot of regional kind of motives, what a character, like what do NPCs from this town care about, the majority of them. What would a NPC in the middle of nowhere care? Sorry, I just bumped my mic. That's terrible audio for listeners. My bad. What would an NPC in the middle of nowhere in this area care about? It's like a desert region, so here water is really important, but the one that has like a river running through their backyard, they don't care so much if the player characters are getting their water bottles refilled, because like, I have infinite access to water, just don't pollute it.
I got plenty. Go for it. I got plenty.
So like stuff like that, thinking out that really knowing your area, knowing your map, knowing your topography is very important for that. Also, coming into that, it's a lot more important to know your gods of the world, all of them. Whereas I do recommend that anyway, when you're getting started, listeners, for your first session, at least know who your gods are coming. You don't need to know all their motives and full interactions, especially if you're doing linear, because you can kind of limit when they get in, kind of introduced into the spotlight, or if. Whereas the open world mindset, it's kind of more like, hey, if the players really want to dive into the gods, they can choose to. If they don't want to, then they don't have to. But here's the thing with D&D. If you give your players the option to do X, or to ask X, or to encounter X, they will eventually in some way. Mm-hmm. And I can almost guarantee you it'll be in the way or when you just don't expect it to. Because you aren't going to be in the same mindset as your players when they're coming into it, especially if you have those honorary veterans like my podcast partner here, who sometimes I think is just thinking about what would throw me the most in the moment.
I can either confirm or deny these allegations. Even though there is a slight possibility of maybe that may or may not be true.
Well, yes, there's a great possibility that it may or may not be true. That's kind of the two options.
I mean, it might be over 50%. It might be over 85, 90%. It might be over 25%. I can't confirm or deny these allegations. Kyle, quit throwing me under the bus.
Love you, Shay.
I'm kidding, because you're probably right. Anyway, one of the things that actually just popped into my head while you were talking about this, and this is actually something that you had referenced, I think when we were talking about Big Bad Evil Guys. Mm-hmm. No matter what your PCs end up doing, your villains can still be doing something else.
Yep.
Okay? So, like,
should be.
If you have a more linear campaign, it could almost be kind of like a quote-unquote space race, if you will, to see who can get the artifact of choice or put the puzzle together and extinguish the other side first or whatever. But if you have a sandbox game, and depending on your players, if they go off on all these little side tangents, you know, your big bad evil guy, depending on when they get introduced and to what level they're introduced, they could be having this whole organization that's been around for hundreds of years, and they're almost like 5 steps away from completing their big plan to cause absolute havoc and chaos in your world. That's kind of the pro and con of, if you want that to happen, you can. And then the actions of the PCs carry a little bit more weight. Mm-hmm. If you allow that to happen and you say, okay, if it's a space race, great. It's just going to be tile. How fast can we get there? But if it's more of a sandbox thing, you can have more side quests, or you could even have more artifacts for the players to find before they go and face the big villain or have this massive showdown. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where really putting the weight of if you're going to do a sandbox, I think especially sandbox. I'm really partial to sandboxes, if you can't tell. But linears are good. Especially if you're going to do a sandbox, you really maybe need to let the players know ahead of time that your decisions have consequences. And whatever you decide to do is fine. I'm not going to stop you, but be prepared for whatever consequences will come after that.
Yeah, it's hey, going on side quests are good because you're going to get stronger. You're going to level. You're going to get stuff.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. During that time, the villains aren't just sitting still. They're also preparing, getting more ready for you, furthering their goals, getting stronger themselves.
Exactly.
Like, in a way, it's kind of encouraging the players like, hey, maybe you don't want to beeline to the finish because then you're not going to be strong enough. But if you take too long, they're going to be even stronger still.
Yeah.
So, encourage exploration in your world because you're going to spend the time making this nice sandbox world. You don't want it to go unexplored. But also at the same time, you don't want what your story is to go forgotten. Now, not every story, and I think this is a gotcha for a lot of us DMs, and guilty right here, not every story has to have the fate of the world on its kind of hook in order for it to matter. It doesn't always have to be the universe is at stake, the world is at stake. For me, especially as a giant comic book nerd who loves Marvel movies and grew up with Spider-Man and Green Lantern and Superman and Batman, I'm used to bigger stakes. And then in the next comic, there's bigger stakes. And in the next one, there's a bigger one. Then we reboot. And now we can have little stakes. And then we have to have bigger. And so, like, it honestly, for after a while, it gets hard not to think of like it needs to be a world level threat in order to get these guys in. But if you remember, especially if you're starting at level 1, it doesn't really make sense for it to be the fate of the world yet. Now, when you're level 10, maybe it's not about saving Mrs. Jennifer's cat anymore. So like make sure that threat grows, but also it could be a village level threat. It could be a threat to somebody's homeland. It could just be like your rival in this scenario, and they're gonna like, depending on your story, you could be telling kind of like a family's quest to reclaiming their rightful space as lord and lady or rulers of this land, and they're going against the rival family. It doesn't have to be like if the bad guys win, the world ends, no sun come up tomorrow every time.
And you bring up a good point too, because like, okay, if you're starting at level 1, you have limited resources, you have limited abilities. Whereas like once you've started getting quite a few levels, you start getting into like double digit levels, your paradigm almost shifts in a sense to where you're not trying to ask for work. People are coming to you and they're saying, hey, I have this problem.
Yeah, at this point, you're a walking legend. You're level 12. You're level 12 plus. You're like there, man.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in some respects, you are a walking legend because most of those people will never ever see anything near half of what your PCs have walked through or dealt with in their entire lives. So you got to be kind of ready for that paradigm shift too, and especially with your gameplay. If you're going to be more linear, all of those side quests kind of have to really mesh together to say, okay, this is where this story is going to end up. This is kind of where I'm going. And the other thing too, and I think this is kind of a key point when you do like story writing too. If you're going to do a linear story, have that end goal in mind.
Yep.
If nothing else, like have like a final scene in your head that this is where it's going to end up eventually. Now let's work backwards and see how we're going to get there.
Famous author, like a lot of famous authors, write the final page of the final book, and then the rest of their books are spent getting there, or they at least story it. Like they write, like this is the concept of the final page, and so it's going to end with the medals being given out, or it's going to end with the hero finally walking off to peace in the woods, or finally accepting their fate in the world. Or some characters, honestly, like I've talked to a lot of D&D players who they say, like, honestly, I don't see a happy ending for my character. Like their roles always in my mind leads to this, and it's not happy. And so like sometimes with those players, it's about like saying like, well, maybe we can change that with some events that happen in this game, or maybe it does end that way for that player, which is sad. It's why we go on this journey together. Now, I'm going to, for a second, kind of talk about my own experience here. So I started off with a very linear, what I called Season 1, which I think is relevant given the announcement we had pre the music. My Season 1 was the starter campaign, Lost Mines of Phandelver, with modified ending, beginning very much just the straight campaign, and then as it went, deviated a little bit more until it very deviated. Then we launched into my Season 2. My Season 2, I had planned on it being a lot more sandbox. In my opinion, with the hindsight, especially since my sessions are recorded, I can listen back to them. I feel like I'm still kind of I'm in a much more defined and built out linear story.
Yeah, and there's really nothing wrong with that, honestly.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's what's been working for us. And I've had and I'm sharing this because I don't think it's bad. And I'm not disappointed. But it is different than what I had in my mind. It's crazy to me that it's gone this way, but also at the same time it makes sense because Season 1 took us 2 years. So it's very hard for me to break my story beats and to break my tendencies of defining, like, I learned from that module in a way, and so I keep writing like it. And my goal is to open this up a lot more and get more into that kind of open world sandbox feel. And so I think that's why the world feels more alive now. But my players have been very much on a set path at this point. And so I'm still trying to slowly break down the walls of that path and introduce more choices and open it up more and making it feel like the path forward isn't clear per se.
Yeah. Well, and if I might jump in for a second, Kyle, on that, because I think the game has kind of continued to be linear because that's kind of the character's mentality also. Not that opening up the world is wrong and turning it from a linear to a sandbox or vice versa would be bad, but the way I'm thinking about it was like, okay, we have had three gems of power that we've talked about.
Well, yeah, there's been
Onyx.
Yeah, we've had
Emerald,
Ruby, the Sapphire, and you guys are after the Onyx.
Okay, so
you've encountered 3,
but we know about 4,
and you're hunting the 4th.
So it's almost like this space race in a sense. If you now, granted, our rogue kind of screwed us, and we have 0 now, but I still love you, buddy.
You were winning.
It was great. It was great. I regret nothing. No regrets. But in the same sense, like, we have kind of taken your mantle of kind of a linear story and kind of kept it going that way because that's the thought process, at least for my character. We're saying, oh snap, there's these things that we need to find, and oh no, now we're really behind. Now we've got to play catch up. We've got to figure out how we're going to pry it out of their hands. There's all these other things. So I think there's nothing wrong with it, but I think the story might stay a little bit linear in that respect, unless we really get this side quest that just goes ding, 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 like over here.
Yep.
We're going to, I have a feeling, I could be wrong because our rogue is amazing and he loves tangents. So unless something, God forbid, something happens, we're probably going to be like pretty one-track mind for a while, at least for a while, from what I can see. But, I've been known to be surprised before, so.
Well, and again, I am 0% sad about this. In my opinion, I would not change a thing about how this has gone, and I hope my players feel the same way. But like, listen, especially when I listen back to it, it just feels like us. It's the identity that we've created around the table, and I think that that's the real key. Is like, I know that there's going to be listeners, if this is you, and you're like, I have a preferred way. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
You are right. You're right, no matter what your opinion is here, because it's an opinion.
Exactly. You
are right that you like that one better. So there's not a better between linear, semi-linear, and open world. They all have massive pros. There's difficulties with each of them. And honestly, it always comes down to how invested into the story style does your playgroup get. And then also, you as the DM, you have to put in the work. For linear storytelling, you have to keep working ahead. You have to keep vetting it out. You have to keep investing into the moments, into the NPCs, into the story. Make it feel alive. Make it feel worth tackling. Make it feel worth the next session. That, if you're doing linear, that hunger to achieve the goal has got to be there, or it's gonna fizzle. If you're doing open world, the world has to feel alive.
Yes.
The world has to feel real. The consequences have to be heavy. The rewards have to be worth it. And there has to be weight to those decisions. Like, we went to City 1 because we wanted to get this super powerful sword that we knew was there. But because we did so, this small village that had this shop guy that we befriended a long time ago, it was burnt down by the bad guys, and that shop guy died. Mm-hmm. That is heavy. And then now we have regret. Like, was this sword worth it?
Yeah.
This world's alive now. And also, we are gonna avenge this guy. Where's the bad guys?
Oh, yeah.
Like, point me in the direction. My barbarian's ready to go.
The word that came to mind when you were talking about it, to me, is organic. Like, the world has to be like super organic. Like, it has to be living and breathing, no matter which style you have. It's got to be breathtaking and eye-catching enough for the players to say, okay, I need to know more about this. I need to know about that. I need to go study whatever, fill in the blank. It's just, it has to, we can't force it. We have to make it really organic to where it's immersive. Like, the players can lose themselves in the story, in their characters, and really kind of indulging themselves in that storytelling of like, okay, I am literally playing this character. Like, for the game that I'm running, right? They took an unexpected turn for me and jumped, again, because this book is very linear. They jumped way ahead of where I thought they were going to go. And
Yep.
I'm leaving it that way because I don't want them to regret, if they did, jumping where they did, because that's kind of made the story the way it has been. I didn't expect them to be dungeon delving so soon, but that's literally what we've been doing for almost a year. Actually, we've been in the same dungeon, and it's massive. But I didn't expect it. I didn't expect them to do that until... I didn't expect them to start dungeon delving until they were probably about next level. So really, for me, it was interesting. I'm like, okay, we're taking a hard left at Albuquerque, and we're saying we're going to go this way instead. And, if we ever get to the other stuff, great. If we don't, oh well. So mine's kind of turned in more of a sandbox, and I've had to kind of modify things to make sure that it's entertaining and interesting. The big thing right now, like I talked about in the last session, is they have this door that has some sort of protection on it that they cannot seem to get past it. And they have tried very interesting ways of trying to open this thing. They have tried throwing water at a magically charged door. They have tried throwing the holy hand grenade of Antioch at said door. They have tried to throw body parts at people. They've tried to throw themselves, and that hasn't worked either. But the whole point of this, I will say this though, when they threw the holy hand grenade, I was like, there's supposed to be a big earth-shattering kaboom. Why was there no big earth-shattering kaboom? Actually, there was a pretty big boom, but they weren't close enough to get damaged, and I'm grateful because that would have been sad.
You're like, no, there's a great way to open the store, you just don't know it. But listeners, when we talk about making it organic, before you get scared, because I know if I were to listen to that 4 years ago when I was thinking about being a DM, I probably would have got intimidated. Remember, this is collaborative. No matter what way you do this is collaborative storytelling. Your players will fill part of the world, but you got to give them that hook. You got to give them that reason to. And some people, it comes really easy. Some people, it is very easy. I'm looking at one right now. It's very easy for them to fill out a character. And when they're doing so, they know in all these scenarios what they're going to do, what they're going to say, what they're going to rise crack, what song they're going to break out into. They have 48 different songs they can choose from in their memory, and they're not even playing a bard. Also, there's players that it's hard for them. It's hard to be social. It's hard to be that. Remember, we talked about there's vulnerability in roleplay. So you got to give them that hook. You got to give that investment in either style. And in the sandbox style, that investment oftentimes is the world. It's the possibilities. This is your opportunity. Go. That can work for so many people. Like the fact that hey, if you want to build a house, you can build a house. You want to go explore this cave and fight every Gerblin you find within it, go for it. If it's the fact that hey, in this world there are werewolves. If you get bit by one, you're going to become one, and it's a real problem. Solve it. That's going to hook. But if it's linear storytelling, that bad guy's got to be hateable. Pay attention to what triggers your characters early when you're doing the little villain. Is it the someone's in trouble, you got to save them scenario? So maybe they kidnapped a village boy, you got to get him back, and that really works for people. Then remember that. If it's the that NPC, that evil goblin had this really powerful weapon, and the party got excited for that. Remember that. And remember those things that were natural hooks that you were just doing when you're experimental early.
Write it down.
Yes. Write it down. Even if you record, write it down.
Especially, yeah. I will say this, it was kind of something to piggyback off of what you were saying. If you're going to, especially with sandboxes too, it's so easy in a sandbox to kind of create your own little world inside the world. So you have a radius from your starting point of, 50 miles or so. But if you'll experience in Skyrim or Uncharted or, no, not Uncharted. No,
Uncharted's more linear.
GTA.
Skyrim,
that's what I was saying. GTA,
Dragon Age.
You're going to have missions where it's going to take you literally halfway across the map. It could be because you got captured somehow and they tied you up really, really good to where you couldn't escape, and they drag you back to their lair, which is clear over yonder in the desert, or they're going to take you to the swamp people, down south, where wherever that ends up being. And so you can kind of expand the map in that way too. You could also do it in a sense of you have that recurring villain, and that recurring villain keeps moving around, And so they have to chase that villain basically all around the map to figure out how to thwart them, how to capture them. And they could be like so close and just get away. Like, hey, I just saw, and you get a clue to keep going. But that would be a way to kind of help you expand the players around your map versus just like say, okay, you have a list of, you have a sandbox. So like you're going to have a list of missions for every little town. But that would kind of give you a way to kind of get them around the world, if you will, to complete those. So that brings me to my next thought, railroading. And I've seen on the forums and I've seen on the internets.
He's read the internet, all of it in its entirety for this question.
Railroading can be a mixed blessing, and it can be an awful curse.
Yep. It's got very negative connotation to it in the D&D realm,
and
for sure.
I think a lot of it, when people think of railroading, at least from what I've seen, people are turned off by railroading because it's very much the DM saying, I do what I want, it's my world, have a nice day. Railroading, in a sense, can be good if done correctly, which goes for everything too. But I say that in the sense of like, okay, if you have a very particular story in mind, you have players that have a hard time being decisive, it can help your story progress, at least in some general direction. As if you're going to use railroading to kind of nudge your players to get going, I'd say that's okay. If you're railroading to say, I'm writing this story because like I have this story to tell and you're going to tell it the way I want to tell it, that's where that line's crossing. You're saying, okay, I don't care about the player, I just care about my story. And at that point, you should put it on paper and publish it, because that's about the only way it's going to really come out the way you want it to, because nobody else can get inside your head, right?
And that's the part where you're breaching the collaborative part. And I think that's what the forums, the community means when we talk about railroading. Is it's not the party wasn't making a decision, so I introduced a character to make or I did something to basically eliminate one of the decisions and move them where I think they were deciding to go, to get it moving again. I think the community is more talking about the times like, hey, the party wanted B, but DM, you chose A anyway. And I think here's the kind of gotcha thing about it, and every group's different. So pranking your party in a small thing when it's not big line story and be like, gotcha, you thought you were choosing this, but it's really this. I did that on a small degree with a restaurant choice because they were fantasy eating. So when they thought they were getting seafood and I sent them to Off the Hook, which was the food they couldn't get on a hook, and swerved them. I think that's different because that was not obviously a big story moment. The fate of the campaign was not decided by if they fantasy shrimp or fantasy hamburger. But I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I think we're talking about when you, the DM, present the party with a choice, and then you ignore their choice and you go with your own. And like Shay said, that you're not collaborative storytelling anymore. You're just storytelling. And there's a entire profession for that, and it's great.
Yeah.
You can be an author. You can create a video short. You can publish a campaign. Linear campaign storytelling is very valid. But even within that, there's choices, and you honor the choices of the party. And so I think DMs, kind of my warning to that is, as much as you can, do not enforce your decision. I know I've had to watch even just how I present the choices, because sometimes I do have one that I'm like, when I first came up with it, I was like, I'm fine with both. And that's why I'm introducing this in the moment. I'm like, oh, I really want you guys to pick this because it'd be great, because it'd be so good for you or so bad for you, one of the two. And so even trying to remain impartial in how you present them is sometimes difficult. And I think just remember, just because it's fun for you, the DM, does not necessarily mean it's fun for the party. Because they're the ones invested in the players, the characters that they are playing as. They are the ones invested in the backstory, the journey of this character. And we, the DMs, we often are invested too. I'm heavily invested and all my players' characters right now, I think they're all in a great spot, and I'm loving everything that's going on with everybody. But my experience with that character is not the same as Shay's experience with Dakar. And if 2 weeks from now when we play again, and he saying like, I want Dakar to go here, and
You're
I go,
going
too
this
bad. Yeah, then, I mean, that's going to cause a rift. It's impossible not to. Even if, like, Shay and I's friendship is strong. I'd like to believe we would recover from that with conversations and stuff, but it's something we'd have to recover from because I've robbed him of the choice of the character that's his. Like, again, I think there's times when as a DM you do have to make a choice because maybe a party's not gunning. And they're to the point where like they're just going to infinite talk forever and nothing's ever going to come out of it. And so it's time to introduce something to spur a choice. It's time for you to act. That's different, in my opinion. That's when it's no longer railroading. You're progressing the story because the story was no longer moving. And that is an easy way for party frustration. It's an easy way for arguments to start. And so it's good to just avoid it. But you have to first let them discuss, and you have to know that it's that moment. Otherwise, it's just you enforcing your decision. And I think the key there is to spur a choice from them, not to decide for them.
Exactly. So, I mean, really, I think to land the plane, Kyle, I mean, really, your style of... I need to find a sound effect for that. But really, I think the big thing when it comes down to is whatever style that you choose to do is fine. I mean, because everybody's going to be different. Everybody has a different way of remembering how to do things, and that's great. But I think the biggest thing is being ready to adapt your world. If you're going on more of an open sandbox, and then it turns into kind of this more linear story because you're chasing the bad guy all around, and they end up having some stuff that you need, or you're racing to get whatever. That's fine.
Or you're coming up to your end game.
Or if for whatever reason you've got kind of a linear game going, and then the party's like, you know what, we're gonna kind of meander off and go this way. We're gonna meander off and go that way. That's fine. You can always lay tiles and bring them kind of back to the idea, because that's what the sandbox is going to do. You're going to kind of bring them back to the original idea eventually. It's just not going to be as prevalent. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is really just embrace that style, whatever philosophy that you want to use, and just really let your mind kind of wander with that, and really allow your DM style to expand and be able to maybe even incorporate both of them into the same campaign. I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that.
Yeah, and also just pay attention to your players, see what they're having the most enjoyment out of. If they are really getting excited by the ports where it's open and they get to explore, and they seem to just be phoning it in when you're doing the more linear, clear story path,
take a note.
Then start leaning more into the open world. If it's vice versa, they're like, man, when it's open world, like, yeah, sure, I'll go over here. But then when it's time for the story beats, they're perked up and they're into it. Remember that. Like, note that. Give them more of what's going to be exciting. Also, talking about that, find out why on the other parts they're not excited for, because maybe it's just how you're presenting it, or they aren't recognizing the opportunity there. And it's amazing, listeners, how often just little conversations fix so much stuff. We're all we're all humans. We have to talk to each other.
Well, again, guys, thank you so much for being here with us, talking about the theories of open worlds versus linear storytelling, and talking about railroading. And we're not talking about the actual railroad. If you have any thoughts, please let us know. We have an email at dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com. We would love to hear any stories that you've got as far as your concepts, how you've ran your games, and we'd just love to talk to you about that. If you want to let us know via social medias, as Kyle has said off and on, we do have a Twitter. You can find us at DMT the Podcast, or using the hashtag Dungeon Master Talk. We do have a Facebook page, the Dungeon Master Talk Facebook page. We would love to talk to you there as well. So for all of us here at DMT, I am Shay.
And I'm Kyle.
We'll see you next time on Dungeon Master Talk.
Bye, guys.